The dawn did not break over the Arizona territory so much as it bled out, a slow, spreading stain of crimson across the charcoal sky. It was the year 1872, and the world here felt as if it were holding its breath, waiting for the sun to strike the anvil of the earth. Clara May Hollis stood on the porch of her father's homestead, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee that had gone cold. At 22 years of age, Clara had learned that the desert did not care for comfort. It only respected endurance. She watched the light catch the tops of the distant mesas, turning the sandstone into burning embers. The wind was already up, carrying the eternal grit that settled in the creases of clothes and the lines of faces. It tasted of dry sage and ancient dust. To her left, stretching toward the horizon like a scar, ran the new telegraph poles. They were stark, unnatural crosses planted in the red dirt, strung with a single wire that hummed when the wind hit it just right. The locals called it the singing wire, the nerve ending of a nation that was stretching its limbs westward, hungry and unyielding. To Clara, it sounded like a warning. She took a sip of the bitter coffee. The homestead was quiet, save for the shifting of the horses in the corral. Her father, Josiah Hollis, was still asleep, or perhaps he was praying. It was difficult to tell the difference with him lately. Both required a silence that felt heavy enough to crush a person. Clara set the cup down on the railing. Her hands were not the soft, pale hands of a lady in a Boston fashion plate. They were brown from the sun. With short, clean nails and calluses on the palms, these were hands that knew how to grind corn, how to aim a rifle, and, thanks to her late mother, how to coax life into the world and keep death at bay. She knew which herbs stopped bleeding and which ones broke a fever. She knew how to turn a breech baby and how to stitch a wound so the scar would fade white and thin. But in this territory, a woman's hands were not valued for what they could do, but for whose ring they could wear. "Clara," a voice rumbled from the doorway. She stiffened but did not turn immediately. "Good morning, Father. The coffee is on the stove." Josiah Hollis stepped out onto the porch. He was a man carved from the same hard oak as the doorframe, gray and unbending. He wore his piety like a stiff collar. "I did not hear you start the fire. I was quiet," she said. "Idleness breeds a wandering mind," Josiah stated, moving to the wash basin. "And a wandering mind leads to sin." It was an old refrain. Clara picked up her cup. "I was watching the sun rise. Father, I hardly think the Lord objects to us admiring his handiwork." Josiah splashed water on his face, sputtering. He dried himself with a rough towel, his eyes fixing on her. "Eldon Pike is coming by after the midday meal. He wishes to discuss the fencing of the lower pasture. You will wear a blue dress, the one without the men's." Clara felt a cold stone settle in her stomach. Eldon Pike was a man of 50 years, a widower with a ranch that swallowed up half the valley and a face that looked as though it had been chewed by coyotes and spat back out. He was powerful, rich, and possessed a gaze that made Clara feel as though he were inspecting a horse's teeth. "I have work to do, Father," Clara said, keeping her voice steady. "Widow Miller's cow is dropping a calf today, and she asked for my help, and I need to go to the trading post for flour." "The Miller woman can tend her own stock," Josiah snapped. "And you will go to the post now and be back before noon. Eldon Pike is a decent man, a God-fearing man. He offers you a place of honor. Clara, safety. In a land like this, safety is not a thing to be scorned." "It is not safe, he offers," Clara murmured, looking back at the telegraph wire. "It is ownership." "Silence," Josiah warned, his voice dropping an octave. "You are 22. You are perilously close to being an old maid. Do you think I will live forever to protect you? Do you think this land is kind to a woman alone?" He gestured vaguely toward the north, toward the jagged cuts of the canyon lands. "There are savages out there, Clara, heathens who would burn this house to the ground for the brass buttons on my coat. Eldon Pike has men, he has walls, he can keep you safe." Clara did not argue. Argument with Josiah Hollis was like throwing pebbles at a cliff face. It changed nothing and only tired the arm. She simply nodded, turned, and went inside to change her dress not into the blue one, but into her riding skirt. The ride to the trading post took 1 hour. Clara rode a roan mare named Bess, a sturdy animal that knew the footing of the wash. The air warmed quickly, the dry heat rising from the ground in shimmering waves. The trading post, owned by Silas Crow, sat at the junction of the main wagon road and the trail leading to the army fort. It was a sprawling, ugly structure of raw timber and adobe, surrounded by a constantly shifting sea of wagons, horses, and weary travelers. As Clara tethered Bess to the rail, the dust in her throat tasted metallic. The porch of the post was crowded. Men smoked and spat tobacco juice into the dirt, their eyes following her with a mixture of boredom and hunger. She kept her chin high, her gaze fixed on the door. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of cured leather, stale whiskey, and unwashed bodies. Silas Crow stood behind the counter. He was a man who looked like a well-fed badger, round in the middle with slicked-back dark hair and eyes that constantly darted around the room, assessing the value of everything they touched. Talking to Crow was a man in the uniform of the United States Cavalry. Clara recognized him Lieutenant Harlan Voss. Voss was tall, handsome, in a sharp, predatory way, with a mustache waxed into perfect points. He stood leaning against the counter, tapping a gloved finger on a map spread out between them. "Cannot guarantee the safety of the supply wagons if we do not expand the perimeter," Voss was saying, his voice smooth and carrying. "The hostiles are moving closer to the mines. I have reports of signal fires on the ridges." Crow nodded, wiping a glass with a rag that looked as dirty as the floor. "Bad for business, Lieutenant. Very bad. If the freight stops, the town starves. And if the town starves, they will look to the army to know why." "They should look to the savages," Voss said, loud enough for the men at the nearby tables to hear. "The Navajo, they signed their treaty. Yes, but do you think a piece of paper changes the nature of a wolf? We need to push the patrols further north, secure the water rights, for the safety of the settlers." "Of course." Clara approached the counter. Voss straightened, tipping his hat. "Miss Hollis, a flower in the dust, as always." Clara ignored the compliment. "Good morning, Lieutenant. Mr. Crow. I need a sack of flour, 5 pounds of coffee, and a box of cartridges for a Winchester rifle." Crow smirked. "Planning a war, Miss Hollis." "Just hunting rabbits," she said dryly. "And protecting my home. As the lieutenant says, it is dangerous out there." Voss chuckled, a low sound that lacked warmth. "Indeed it is. You should tell your father to be wary. My scouts found fresh tracks near the dry creek bed, not 3 miles from your homestead. Unshod ponies. Dine warriors." "The Dine stay on their reservation," Clara said, her voice firm. "They have no quarrel with us." "Desperation makes quarrels. Miss Hollis," Voss said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Or perhaps just bloodlust. We found a wagon burned yesterday, 10 miles east. The driver was scalped." A murmur went through the room. Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. She knew the Dine people. Her mother had traded with them years ago, and had learned from their healers. They fought when pushed. Yes, but random slaughter of a lone wagon driver did not sound like the warriors she had heard of. It sounded chaotic. It sounded wrong. "Here's your order," Crow said, heaving a sack onto the counter. "That will be $4.50. Prices have gone up. Hazard pays for the freight drivers." "That is robbery." "Silas," Clara said, outraged. "That is supply and demand, my dear." Crow replied with an oily smile. "If the savages stop the wagons, the flour becomes gold." Clara slapped the coins onto the wood. She grabbed the heavy sack, refusing Voss's offer of assistance. As she turned to leave, the door of the trading post opened, and the room went silent. A man stood in the doorway. He was Dine. He wore a mixture of traditional buckskin and white man's trousers, with a heavy wool blanket draped over one shoulder despite the heat. His hair was black as a raven's wing, tied back, and a band of red cloth was wrapped around his forehead. He was tall, lean, and moved with a fluid grace that made the heavy-booted men in the room look clumsy. His face was striking high cheekbones, a strong nose, and eyes that were dark and unreadable. He did not look at the floor. He looked straight ahead, his presence commanding a grudging respect even from those who hated him. The locals called him Kai Nez. No one knew his true name. He was a scout, sometimes working for the army, sometimes vanishing into the canyons for months. Voss stiffened. "Nez, you are late." The Navajo man did not answer immediately. He walked to the counter, his steps silent. He placed a small leather pouch on the wood. "The trail is cold. Lieutenant, the tracks you saw were old, no war party. My men say otherwise," Voss snapped. "Your men see shadows and call them monsters," Kai Nez said. His voice was deep, the English accented but clear. "There are no Navajo raiding parties near the settlement, only ghosts." Crow laughed nervously. "Ghosts don't burn wagons. Kai turned his head slowly to look at Crow. The trader's smile faltered. "Men burn wagons," Kai said. "Men who want trouble." For a second, his eyes met Clara's. It was a brief connection, a collision of two worlds. In his gaze, she did not see the savagery her father preached about, nor the mindless violence Voss described. She saw intelligence. She saw a profound, weary sadness, and a hardness that came from survival. It was the look of a man who stood alone against a storm. Then he looked away. Clara felt a strange flush rise in her cheeks. She hoisted her flour sack and hurried out the door, her heart beating an unfamiliar rhythm against her ribs. The ride back to the homestead was grueling. The sun was high now. A white-hot coin burned into the sky. The wind had picked up, whipping Clara's skirt and stinging her face with sand. When she arrived, Eldon Pike's buggy was already in the yard. It was a shiny black vehicle with red wheels, polished to a gleam that looked obscene amidst the dust and scrub brush. Clara stabled Bess and walked to the house, smoothing her hair. She entered the parlor to find her father and Pike sitting in the two wingback chairs. Eldon Pike stood up. He was a large man, heavy in the gut and jowls. He wore a suit that was too thick for the climate, sweating profusely. His face ruddy. He smelled of expensive bay rum and stale cigars. "Miss Clara," Pike boomed. "A vision, as always, even with the dust of the road upon you." "Mr. Pike," Clara said, nodding. She did not offer her hand. "Eldon has brought news," Josiah said, his voice unusually animated. "He has acquired the deed to the section of land adjacent to the creek. The water rights are his. That connects your land to mine." "Josiah," Pike said, beaming. "It makes sense, does it not, to join forces, to join families?" He stepped closer to Clara. She had to force herself not to step back. The proximity of him was suffocating. "I am a man of means." "Clara," Pike said, his voice lowering to what he likely thought was a seductive register. "I have a large house, servants. You would not have to ride to town for flour like a common farm girl. You would sit in a parlor and sew. You would be the queen of the valley. And what if I prefer riding to sewing?" "Mr. Pike?" Clara asked. Pike laughed, a wet, hacking sound. "Spirit, I like that. A mare needs a little spirit before she is broken to the saddle. It makes the ride more interesting." The analogy made Clara's stomach turn. She looked at her father, hoping for defense, but saw only approval. Josiah saw a merger, not a marriage. He saw protection from the savages, security against the drought. He did not see his daughter. "We will announce the engagement at the church picnic in 2 weeks, Pike declared, as if it were already decided. "I have spoken to the Reverend in town. He agrees it is a fine match." "I have not agreed," Clara said, her voice trembling slightly. "Clara," her father warned. "You are young," Pike said dismissively, waving a hand. "You do not know what is best. The world is changing, girl. The railroad is coming. The army is clearing out the riffraff. Men like me, we are the future. You can be part of that future, or you can dry up in this shack like a corn husk." He reached out and took her hand. His palm was damp and hot. "Think about it. But do not think too long. I am not a patient man." He squeezed her fingers, hard enough to hurt, then let go. That night, the wind howled around the eaves of the small wooden house, sounding like the cries of lost souls. Clara lay in her bed in the loft, staring up at the darkness. She felt the walls closing in, on one side, the stifling piety of her father, on the other, the suffocating ownership of Eldon Pike, and outside, the vast, terrifying, beautiful emptiness of the territory, now tainted by the talk of war and blood. She thought of the telegraph wire, humming its electric song. She thought of the map on the counter between Crow and Voss, dividing up the land like a butcher divides a carcass. And unbidden, the image of the Navajo warrior, Kai Nez, rose in her mind. She remembered the stillness of him, the way he had stood in the center of the trading post, surrounded by enemies, yet completely untouched by their fear. "Men burn wagons," he had said. Clara turned over, pulling the quilt up to her chin. The air was turning cold, a sharp drop that promised frost or worse. She listened to the wind. For years, she had heard it as a call to leave, a whisper of freedom. But tonight, it sounded different. It sounded like a storm was coming, not just of wind and rain, but of fire and steel. She did not know that less than 3 miles away, under the cover of the screaming wind. A group of men dressed in buckskins but speaking English were riding hard toward the canyon, torches in their hands. She did not know that the safety her father craved was an illusion, and that the only thing that would stand between her and the coming darkness was the very savage she had been taught to fear. Clara closed her eyes, but sleep was a stranger. The inciting incident of her life was already riding toward her, carrying a bullet and a bloody ledger, waiting for the sun to rise. 3 days had passed since the incident at the trading post, and the tension in the valley had tightened like a wet rawhide drying in the sun. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and dry sage. It was late afternoon, the time of day when shadows stretched long and thin across the red earth, distorting the shapes of the scrub oak and mesquite into grasping fingers. Clara May Hollis was near the southern edge of the homestead, gathering stiff stalks of rabbit brush for the fire. The silence of the desert was absolute, a heavy blanket that smothered sound. Then, it tore open. A single gunshot cracked through the air. It was not the sharp pop of a hunter's rifle. It was the heavy, flat boom of a military carbine. The sound rolled off the canyon walls, echoing once, twice, before dying away. Clara dropped the bundle of brush. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She waited for a second shot, but none came. There was only the wind, hissing through the dry grass. She should have gone back to the house. Her father would be angry if she was out past the time when the light failed. But curiosity, mixed with a strange, cold dread, pulled her forward. She moved toward the dry arroyo that cut through the edge of their land, a jagged scar in the earth where water only ran when the heavens opened. At the lip of the ravine, she stopped. The red dirt at her feet was disturbed. A boot print, deep and dragging, scuffed the crust, and there, stark and terrifying against the pale dust, was blood. It was not a spray, but a heavy, continuous drip, black-red and already congealing in the dry air. Someone was hurt, badly. Clara scrambled down the slope, her boots sliding on loose shell. The trail led into the shadow of a limestone overhang, a shallow cave carved by centuries of flash floods. He was there. The dying warrior from the trading post lay crumpled against the rock wall. He was curled on his side, one hand pressed tight against his ribs, the blood seeping through his fingers to pool on the stone. His breathing was a ragged, wet sound, like a saw cutting through green wood. Clara dropped to her knees beside him. "Mr. Nez," she whispered, the name feeling absurdly formal in the face of such violence. He did not move. His eyes were closed, his face the color of old ash. Clara saw the wound immediately. A bullet had grazed his side, tearing a deep furrow along the ribs. But the real damage looked to be his shoulder, which was twisted at a sickening angle, the result of a fall from a horse or a cliff. Beside him, half buried in the dust, lay a torn strip of blue wool, the unmistakable fabric of a cavalry uniform. And next to that was a small, leather-bound notebook. It had fallen open, the pages fluttering in the slight breeze. Clara reached for the notebook, her hands trembling. She meant to close it, to respect the privacy of a dying man. But the ink caught her eye. It was not written in the dying language, nor was it a warrior's tally of coups counted. It was a ledger. The handwriting was cramped and precise. October 12, 12 crates standard issue. Delivered to SC. Payment received gold. October 14, whiskey. 5 barrels. Delivered to Canyon Drop, says C. October 15, to stir the hive, burn the spectral wagon. Clara stared at the letters. S.C. Silas Crow, and the note about the wagon, the very wagon Voss had claimed was burned by savages. This was not a diary of war. It was a receipt of treason. This book proved that the raids, the fear, the calls for military intervention, it was all a manufactured play, orchestrated for profit and land. If Harlan Voss or Silas Crow knew this book existed, they would kill anyone who had seen it. A sound from the rim of the arroyo made her blood freeze. The baying of hounds. It was distant, carried on the wind, but getting louder. Men were coming. They were tracking the blood. Clara looked down at the warrior. If she left him, they would find him. They would shoot him where he lay. Or worse, they would drag him back to town and hang him as the villain of their story. And the truth in the notebook would be buried with him. She looked at his face. It was a hard face, even in unconsciousness, but there was no cruelty in it. He was the victim here. "You cannot stay here," she hissed, though he could not hear her. Clara made a choice. It was a choice that defied every law of her father, every expectation of her society, and every instinct of self-preservation. She grabbed the warrior by his good arm. He was heavy, dead weight, solid muscle and bone. She gritted her teeth, digging her heels into the sand. "Get up," she commanded, her voice breaking. "You have to help me." Miraculously, a groan escaped his lips. His legs shifted. He was not fully awake, but the pain had roused a primal instinct to move. Clara hauled him up. He leaned heavily against her, his head lolling. The smell of copper blood and sweat filled her nose. She guided him out of the overhang and up a narrow deer trail that led toward the back of the homestead, away from the main road where the dogs were baying. They moved like a drunken, four-legged beast, stumbling over rocks and sagebrush. Every step was a battle. Clara felt her muscles screaming, her breath tearing at her throat. They reached the back of the house. The kitchen door was unlocked. Clara practically dragged him over the threshold. The kitchen was cool and dim, smelling of dried onions and lye soap. In the corner, beneath a braided rug, was the trap door to the root cellar. It was a small, earthen space used for keeping potatoes and carrots from spoiling in the heat. Clara kicked the rug aside and heaved the heavy iron ring. The door groaned open, revealing a gaping black square. "Down!" she gasped, easing him toward the edge. "You have to go down." She managed to lower him, half dropping him onto the sacks of potatoes below. He landed with a heavy thud and a sharp intake of breath, then went silent. Clara slammed the trapdoor shut and kicked the rug back into place. But she was not done. She grabbed a bucket of water and a handful of wood ash from the stove. She ran back outside, to the trail of blood leading to the door. She scrubbed the dirt, turning the red mud into gray sludge, covering the tracks with ash, scattering feed for the chickens over the wet spots to hide the disturbance. The barking was louder now. They were close, maybe half a mile. She ran back inside, her chest heaving. She stripped off her bloody apron and shoved it deep into the wood stove, watching the flames curl around the fabric. She scrubbed her hands in the wash basin, the water turning pink. Then she knelt by the trapdoor again, lifting it just an inch. "Can you hear me?" she whispered into the dark. A low, guttural sound answered her. He was alive. Clara lit a lantern and slipped down the ladder, pulling the door shut above her head. The cellar was cramped, smelling of damp earth and raw vegetables. Inez lay on the dirt floor, his breathing shallow. She set the lantern down. The light threw sharp, jagged shadows against the dirt walls. She took her shears from her pocket, she always carried them for the garden, and cut away the blood-soaked buckskin shirt. The wound on his ribs was angry and jagged, but the bullet had passed through the flesh without shattering the bone. The shoulder was dislocated. "This will hurt," she whispered. She needed to clean the wound before infection set in. She had no whiskey, only a jar of vinegar she kept for pickling. She poured it over a clean rag. Kai's eyes flew open. They were not the eyes of a victim. They were obsidian, sharp and focused, instantly aware. He did not cry out. His hand shot out, gripping Clara's wrist with a strength that made her gasp. He looked at her, his gaze traveling from her face to the cellar walls, then back to her. He realized where he was. He realized she was not an enemy. "The book," he rasped, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together. "I have it," Clara said, her voice shaking. "I saw the writing. I know." He stared at her for a long second, his grip loosening slightly but not letting go. "They are coming." "I know," she said. "Lie still." She pressed the vinegar cloth to his side. His whole body went rigid, cords of muscle standing out on his neck. But he made no sound. His eyes rolled back, and he slumped into unconsciousness again. Clara sat back on her heels, shaking. She was trapped in a hole in the ground with a savage warrior, a book of treason, and a lie that could get her hanged. Above her, heavy footsteps thudded on the floorboards of the kitchen. Clara froze. She blew out the lantern instantly, plunging the cellar into pitch blackness. "Clara!" It was her father's voice, and with it, another voice, heavier, jovial, terrifying. "Josiah, surely she is about. A woman does not wander far when the sky looks like this." Eldon Pike. Clara pressed a hand over her mouth. She could hear the muffled whimpers of Inez in the dark beside her. If he groaned now, if he shifted, if he even breathed too loud. She scrambled up the ladder, pushing the trapdoor open with her head, careful to keep the rug draped over it as she emerged. She slid out, arranging the rug with her foot, and stood up just as Josiah walked into the kitchen. "There you are," Josiah said, frowning. "I called for you 3 times. I was checking the preserves." "Father," Clara said, breathless. "In the cellar. I thought a jar had burst." Pike was standing by the stove, his large frame filling the room. He was dressed in his Sunday best, a suit that looked ready to split at the seams. "Hard-working," Pike said, nodding approvingly. "I like that. A woman who knows the value of a well-stocked larder." He took a step toward her. He was standing directly on the edge of the rug, directly over the man beneath the floor. "We have discussed the date," Pike said, smiling. His teeth were yellowed like old ivory. 3 weeks from Sunday. The banns will be read this week." Clara felt a wave of nausea. "That is very soon. Mr. Pike." "No sense in waiting," Pike said. "The world is dangerous. Clara, I heard reports on the way here. A patrol was fired upon. Savages. Voss is organizing a search party. They say the leader of the raiding party was wounded." Clara gripped the edge of the table. "Wounded. Hit in the gut. They think," Pike said with relish. "He won't get far. Dogs will find him. Or the coyotes will." Below the floor, a soft thud. Kai must have shifted. Pike paused. "What was that?" "Rats," Clara said quickly, her voice too loud. "The cellar is full of them. Big ones. I have been trying to trap them for weeks." Josiah looked at her with disdain. "You should have put down poison, as I told you. A filthy house is a shame to the Lord." "Yes, Father," Clara said. "I will attend to it. See that you do," Josiah said. "Now, make us some coffee. Mister, Pike has ridden a long way." Clara moved to the stove, her legs feeling like water. She had to build a fire, grind the beans, boil the water all while the man beneath the floor bled, and the man who wanted to own her stood 6 feet above him. As she worked, the light in the kitchen began to fail rapidly. The window turned a bruised purple. Then, the sky broke. It started with a sound like rocks being thrown at the house. Clack, clack, boom, hail. It was an unseasonal storm, violent and sudden, born from the clash of cold mountain air and desert heat. Within seconds, the rhythmic tapping turned into a deafening roar. Ice stones the size of walnuts pounded the roof shingles. The noise was incredible, a chaotic cacophony that drowned out all conversation, all breath, and mercifully, any sound from the cellar. "Merciful heavens!" Josiah shouted over the din. "It's a deluge!" Pike yelled. "The road will be washed out in 10 minutes. Clara looked out the window. The dry yard was vanishing under a sheet of white ice and churning brown mud. The arroyo where she had found Kai would be a raging torrent by now. If she had left him there, he would have drowned. "You cannot ride back in this, Eldon," Josiah shouted. "You must stay until it passes." "I suppose I must." Pike agreed, looking not at all displeased at the prospect of being trapped in the house with Clara. The storm raged for hours. The sun went down, unseen behind the clouds. The temperature plummeted. Clara served coffee and stale biscuits, forcing herself to sit still while the men talked of cattle prices and the inevitable extermination of the tribes. Every minute was an agony. She imagined Kai waking up in the dark, confused, perhaps trying to climb out. She imagined the blood seeping through the floorboards. Finally, around 9 o'clock, the hail turned to a cold, miserable rain. The roar on the roof subsided to a steady drumming. The house was quiet. Josiah opened his Bible to read a passage. Pike was dozing in his chair, his chin resting on his chest. Then, it came. Bang, bang, bang. A fist hammered on the front door. It was not a polite knock. It was the demand of authority. Pike jerked awake. Josiah stood up, his face stern. "Who comes at this hour?" He went to the door and pulled it open. A gust of wind and rain blew into the parlor, extinguishing the lamp on the table. In the doorway stood 3 men. They were soaked to the bone, their slickers gleaming in the light of the lantern one of them held. It was not the sheriff. It was Silas Crow's men, mercenaries, hard men with eyes that had seen too much and cared too little. The leader was a man named Skinner, known for the knife he carried in his boot. "Mr. Hollis," Skinner said. He did not remove his hat. Water dripped from the brim onto the floor. "What is the meaning of this?" Josiah demanded. "We're tracking a dog," Skinner said. His eyes swept the room, lingering on Clara, then moving to Pike. "Lieutenant Voss says he came this way. A buck, bleeding. We lost the trail in the hail, but the dogs were keen on your fence line before the ice hit." He took a step inside, uninvited. "Did you see a Navajo come through here?" Skinner asked. His hand rested casually on the pistol at his hip. "Hurt bad, probably crawling." Clara stood by the kitchen doorway. She could feel the vibration of the floorboards beneath her feet. She imagined Kai Nez beneath her, holding his breath in the dark. "We have seen no one," Josiah said, affronted. "We have been inside since the storm began." Skinner looked at Clara. He smiled, and it was a terrible thing. "What about you? Miss, you were out. Saw you collecting brush." He took another step, his muddy boots leaving prints on the clean floor. "You see any bleeding stray dogs, Miss Hollis?" Clara looked at him. She looked at the mud on his boots. She thought of the man in the cellar, the man who had looked at her with eyes like knives and a soul full of tragedy. The silence stretched, tight as a bowstring, ready to snap. Clara May Hollis looked at the mud caking the floorboards where Skinner stood. She felt the heavy thud of her own heart against her ribs. A frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. The silence in the room was thick enough to choke on. Skinner's eyes were flat and hard, searching her face for a tremor, a flush, any sign of deceit. "A coyote," Clara said. Her voice was steady, surprising even herself. "I saw a coyote near the coop. It was dragging a hind leg. I threw a rock at it to keep it away from the hens. That is likely the blood you tracked." Skinner stared at her for a long moment. Then he shifted his weight, the leather of his gun belt creaking. "A coyote," he repeated, dragging the word out. Yes, Clara said. Unless the United States Cavalry has taken to raiding chicken coops, Mr. Skinner, I suggest you look for your savage elsewhere. Josiah Hollis stepped forward, his face darkening with indignation. You question my daughter's words. Sir, she is a God-fearing woman. If she says she saw a coyote, she saw a coyote. Now, remove your muddy boots from my parlor before I forget my Christian charity. Eldon Pike chuckled, the sound rumbling deep in his chest. Come now, Skinner. You are chasing shadows. The girl was likely frightened by a car. No Navajo would come this close to a settled house unless he wanted a bullet. They are cowardly creatures. Skinner spat on the floor, missing the rug by an inch. Maybe, maybe not. He tipped his hat to Clara, a gesture that felt more like a threat than a courtesy. We will check the barn. If you see him, you scream. He will slit your throat for a copper pot. The men turned and filed out into the rain. The door slammed shut, leaving the smell of wet wool and malice hanging in the air. Filthy business, Pike muttered, settling back into his chair. But necessary. Voss will have the man scalped by morning. Clara excused herself, claiming she needed to bank the fire in the kitchen stove for the night. Her hands shook so badly she had to clasp them together inside her apron pocket. She busied herself with the iron stove, making noise with the lids and the poker, waiting until the murmur of conversation in the parlor settled into a rhythmic drone. When she was certain her father and Pike were engrossed in their discussion of fence lines, she locked the back door and shoved the heavy bolt home. Then, she knelt by the rug. She lifted the trapdoor. The darkness below seemed to breathe up at her, cold and smelling of damp earth. She lit a fresh lantern, turned the wick low, and descended. Kai Nez lay exactly where she had left him, a heap of dark limbs against the pale sacks of potatoes. He was shivering violently. The chill of the storm had seeped into the ground, and the blood loss had stolen his fire. Clara set the lantern on an upturned crate. The light flickered, casting long, dancing shadows against the dirt walls. She felt a wave of vertigo. She was a spinster by the standards of the territory, a woman who had never known the touch of a man save for the rough hand of her father or the unwanted advances of Eldon Pike. Yet here she was, in a hole in the ground, about to put her hands on a warrior who was half-naked and likely dangerous. Do it, she told herself. He is flesh and blood, just flesh and blood. She knelt beside him. I am going to help you, she whispered. He did not open his eyes, but his brow furrowed as if he heard her from a great distance. Clara worked quickly. She had brought a basin of warm water, a bar of lye soap, her sewing kit, and a pouch of dried yarrow and willow bark. She dipped a clean rag into the water and began to wash the blood from his side. His skin was bronze and hot to the touch, burning with the onset of fever. The muscles of his torso were defined and hard, twitching involuntarily as the cloth passed over the raw furrow of the bullet wound. Clara forced herself to look only at the injury, to see the torn flesh as a problem to be solved, not as part of a man. The bullet did not stay in, she murmured, mostly to steady her own nerves. It passed through. That is good. She cleaned the wound with whiskey she had stolen from her father's medicinal supply. When the alcohol touched the raw meat, Kai hissed through his teeth, his back arching off the dirt floor. His eyes snapped open. They were black, bottomless, and for a second, totally wild. He tried to scramble back, his hand scrabbling for a knife that was not there. Quiet, Clara ordered, pressing a hand to his good shoulder. They are upstairs. If you make a sound, we are both dead. Kai froze. He looked at her hand on his shoulder, then up at her face. The panic in his eyes receded, replaced by a razor-sharp clarity. He remembered. He slumped back, his chest heaving. Water, he croaked. Clara lifted a ladle to his lips. He drank greedily, water spilling down his chin. I have to stitch this, Clara said, threading a needle with silk thread she had boiled. And your shoulder is out. I cannot fix the shoulder until the stitching is done, or the movement will tear the skin again. He nodded once. He did not ask for a stick to bite on. He simply turned his head to the side and stared at the earthen wall. Clara began to sew. The needle pierced the tough skin. Her hands, usually so steady when embroidering a pillowcase or dressing a chicken, trembled slightly, but she forced them to be still. In, out, pull tight, knot. The rain hammered against the ground outside, a dull roar that muffled the small sounds of the cellar, the snap of the thread, the shallow, ragged breathing of the man. It felt intimate, this small circle of light in the darkness. It was a violation of every rule she had been taught about propriety, yet it felt more holy than any sermon she had heard in the white church. When the last knot was tied, Clara sat back, wiping sweat from her forehead. "The shoulder," she said. "I have to put it back. It will hurt more than the bullet." Kai turned to look at her. "Do it." Clara positioned herself. She had seen her mother do this once for a ranch hand. She took his arm, positioning it carefully. "On 3, she lied. "On 1. She pulled and twisted with all her strength. The bone popped back into the socket with a sickening crunch. Kai let out a sound that was half groan, half sob, his body seizing up like a bowstring. His good hand shot out and clamped around Clara's wrist, squeezing so hard she felt her bones grind together. He did not let go. He held her there, panting, his forehead slick with sweat, his eyes squeezed shut against the agony. Clara did not pull away. She stayed frozen, her pulse hammering in her wrist against his palm. She watched his face, the sharp angles of his cheekbones, the way his eyelashes lay against his skin. He was beautiful in a way that was terrifying. He was the storm outside, brought indoors, slowly. The tension left his body. His grip on her wrist loosened, but he did not release her. He opened his eyes and looked at her. "Thank you," he said. The words were rough, unused. "You are welcome," Clara whispered. She gently pulled her hand away. The ghost of his touch lingered on her skin, burning. She busied herself with the poultice, spreading the yarrow paste over the stitched wound and binding his ribs with strips of linen. When she was finished, she propped his head up on a sack of grain and fed him tea made from willow bark to ease the pain and fever. He watched her every move. There was no lust in his gaze, but there was an intensity that made Clara feel exposed. "Why?" he asked. "Why what? Why do you help your people? They hunt mine like wolves hunt rabbits." "I am not my people," Clara said, wringing out a bloody rag. "And you were bleeding on my land?" "I was taught that life is sacred. All life." Kai studied her. "You live in a cage. Bilagana woman, the man with the loud voice. He owns this house." "My father," Clara said. "And the other one, the one who smells of grease and fear. He wishes to marry me." Kai's eyes narrowed. "And you, do you want it?" Clara looked down at her hands. "It does not matter what I wish. It is what must be done. He can protect the land. He cannot even protect his own soul," Kai said quietly. Then he asked a question that struck Clara like a physical blow. "Are you free?" Clara looked up, startled. "Of course I am free. I am a citizen. I am not a slave." "I did not ask if you were a slave." Kai said, "I asked if you were free. Can you walk out that door and go where the wind takes you? Can you choose who you lie with? Can you choose your own death?" Clara opened her mouth to answer, but no words came. She thought of the blue dress. She thought of Eldon Pike's damp hands. She thought of the telegraph wire, stringing the world together and binding her to a life she hated. "No," she whispered. "I suppose I am not." Kai nodded slowly. "Then we are both prisoners in this hole." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unsaid things. Clara reached out to check his temperature, her hand brushing his forehead. It was a simple, medical gesture, but the air in the cellar seemed to shift. Kai's hand moved, catching her wrist again. This time, it was gentle. He stopped her hand before she could pull away, holding it suspended in the air between them. "Do not touch the wound," he said softly. "The medicine is working. Let it be." But he did not let go of her wrist. His thumb brushed against the pulse point on the inside of her arm. Clara felt a jolt of electricity shoot up her shoulder. She should have pulled away. She should have been offended. but she stood rooted to the spot, unable to move. For a moment, there was no father upstairs, no Eldon Pike, no war, no hate. There was only the heat of his skin, the smell of rain and earth, and the beating of two hearts in the dark. It was a dangerous, terrifying intimacy. Clara gently disengaged her hand. She turned to the small pile of his belongings she had hidden in the corner. "The notebook," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I saw it. The writing inside." Kai's expression hardened. The softness vanished. "Did you read it?" "I saw enough," Clara said. She picked up the leather-bound book. "It lists deliveries, whiskey, rifles, and money paid. It is signed with initials, S.C. "Silas Crow," Kai said. The name was a curse on his lips. "And it mentions the burning of the wagon," Clara continued. "The one Lieutenant Voss said was attacked by your people." "There were no Dine there," Kai said. His voice was cold. "I was tracking them. 5 men. They wore moccasins, but they walked like white men. They rode shod horses. They painted their faces, but their hair was cut short under wigs." Clara gasped. "They were pretending they want a war," Kai explained. "Crow wants the freight contracts for the army. Voss wants a promotion and the land for the mines. They need the army to come in force. To do that, they need a massacre. They need fear. So they create the raids," Clara whispered, horror dawning on her. "They kill their own people and blame you." "And I found them," Kai said. "I found their camp. I took the book from the saddlebag of the leader while he slept, but they woke up. One of them shot me as I rode away. This book," Clara held it tight. "This hangs them. If the judge in Prescott saw this—" "The judge is 3 days' ride away," Kai said. "And Voss has men on every road. If they find that book, they will kill anyone holding it." "Then we must hide it," Clara said. "And hide you." "They will not stop looking," Kai warned. He tried to sit up, wincing. "Crow knows I have the book. He knows what is in it. He will tear this valley apart to find it. He has already spread the lie. He tells your people that the Navajo have gone mad with bloodlust." "I heard them," Clara admitted. "Pike said Voss is forming a posse. They are calling for volunteers." "A posse," Kai scoffed. "A lynch mob. They will kill any Dine they find. My brother, my family. They are in danger." "You cannot go to them," Clara said firmly. "You cannot even stand. I have to warn them." "You will die before you reach the creek," Clara said. She put a hand on his chest, pushing him gently back down. The contact was firm, authoritative. "You stay. You heal. I will keep you safe." Kai looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "You risk much, Clara May Hollis." "Why for a stranger?" "Because it is right," Clara said. "And because I hate them. I hate the lies." She stood up, smoothing her apron. The moment of vulnerability was over. She was the nurse again, the keeper of the house. "I must go up," she said. "If I am gone too long, they will wonder. I will leave the lantern, but keep it low. I will bring food when I can." She climbed the ladder, pausing at the top. "Clara," Kai said. She looked down. He was looking at the ceiling, at the floorboards that separated him from the men who wanted him dead. "They will come back," he said. His voice was low, vibrating in the damp air. "Crow is a snake. He will sense the lie, and when he does, he will not knock on your door next time. He will burn this house to the ground to silence you." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. "Then let them come," she said, though her voice shook. "I will be ready." She pushed the trapdoor open and climbed out, lowering it carefully behind her. She pulled the rug back into place. The kitchen was cold. The fire in the stove had burned down to embers. Clara walked to the window and looked out. The rain had stopped, but the darkness was absolute. She touched her wrist, where his hand had been. The skin still felt hot. Upstairs, she heard the heavy snoring rhythm of Eldon Pike. It sounded like the growl of a beast. Clara realized with a start that she felt safer in the cellar with the savage than she did in her own house with the civilized men. She went to the cupboard and took out her father's heavy Colt revolver. She checked the cylinder. It was fully loaded. She wrapped it in a towel and placed it in the flour bin, within easy reach. Let them come. She was not just Clara May Hollis, the spinster daughter, anymore. She was a keeper of secrets. She was a conspirator, and for the first time in her life, she felt entirely, terrifyingly awake. The following morning, the homestead felt less like a sanctuary and more like a tomb. The storm had passed, leaving the earth raw and smelling of wet iron, but the clouds still hung low, pressing down on the roof of the Hollis house. Clara moved through her chores with the stiffness of a marionette. Every time she walked across the kitchen floor, she was acutely aware of the man breathing silently beneath the pine boards. Eldon Pike had not left. He sat at the head of the table as if he already owned the place, drinking Josiah's coffee and speaking in a voice that vibrated the china in the cupboard. "It is settled then," Pike said, wiping crumbs from his beard. "Skinner and the boys will sweep the North Ridge today. If the savage is out there, they will flush him. And Josiah. I have spoken to the surveyor. Once the wedding is done, we will knock down the south fence. Run my cattle straight to the creek." Clara froze, the kettle in her hand suspended mid-air. The south fence. That was the boundary of her mother's garden, the only fertile patch of land that kept them fed during the dry years. The creek. Josiah hesitated, looking at his daughter's back. But that cuts through the homestead plot, Clara's garden. Sentimental waste of good grazing land. Pike dismissed. "We need water for the herd. Josiah, that is the future. A garden is a hobby. Beef is commerce." Clara turned slowly. The pieces of the puzzle, jagged and ugly, finally clicked together. It was not about her virtue. It was not even about her father's safety. "It is the water," she said, her voice quiet but cutting through the room like a cold draft. Pike looked up, annoyed. "What is that, girl? You do not want a wife, Mr. Pike," Clara said, stepping forward. "You want the creek. You want the homestead rights that come with my dowry. You want to drown my mother's garden to water your steers." Josiah stood up, his face flushing. "Clara, watch your tongue." "No, Father," Clara said, and for the first time in 22 years, she did not lower her eyes. "You say he offers safety. He offers theft. He is using fear of the Navajo to steal what you have worked for." Pike stood up slowly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The mask of the jovial suitor slipped, revealing the predator beneath. "Your father is an old man. Clara, he cannot hold this land alone. The savages are coming. Without me. You burn. With me. You live. It is a simple trade." "It is not a trade," Clara said, her hands balling into fists. "It is extortion, and I will not marry for fear." "You will marry because you are told," Josiah shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "I have given my word." "Then take it back," Clara said. "Because I am leaving." "Leaving?" Pike laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Where will you go out there into the arms of the raiders?" "Better the raiders than a thief in a Sunday suit," Clara spat. She turned and bolted for the back door. "Stop her!" Pike roared. But Clara was already out. She didn't run for the stables. She ran to the cellar doors outside, the heavy wooden flaps she had covered with straw. She threw them open. "Kai!" she screamed. "Run!" He was already moving. The adrenaline of the shout had pierced his fever. Kai Nez surged up the earthen steps, his face pale, his arm bound tight to his chest, but his legs driving him upward. "The horses!" Kai rasped. "No time." Clara grabbed his good arm. "The canyon. They expect us on the road." A gunshot splintered the wood of the cellar door just as they ducked behind the water trough. Pike was standing on the porch, a smoking pistol in his hand. "Get the dogs!" Pike screamed to Skinner, who was running from the barn. Clara and Kai scrambled over the rear fence, dropping into the dense mesquite brush. They ran until their lungs burned and the shouts of the men faded into the howling wind of the canyon. The Badlands of Arizona were a place where God practiced his sculpture with a hammer and chisel. It was a landscape of violent beauty, red rock spires, deep, twisting arroyos, and silence so profound it felt heavy. By late afternoon, the adrenaline had faded, replaced by a grueling, bone-deep exhaustion. They had avoided the main trails, sticking to the goat paths that wound high along the canyon walls. Kai was flagging. The fever was returning, his skin hot to the touch. He leaned heavily on Clara, his breathing ragged. "Leave me," he murmured, his voice thick. "You can move faster alone." "Be quiet," Clara said, gritting her teeth under his weight. "I did not ruin my life to let you die in a ditch." The sky above them was bruising purple again. The air grew heavy, static electricity lifting the fine hairs on Clara's arms. "Storm," Kai said, looking up with glazed eyes. "High country rain." "It is not raining here," Clara said. "It rains up there." Kai gestured weakly to the distant peaks. "Water comes down. Fast." They were traversing a narrow slot canyon, the walls rising 200 feet on either side. The floor was dry sand. Then Clara heard it. It sounded like a freight train approaching from the earth itself. A low, grinding rumble. "Up!" Kai shouted, suddenly shoving her toward a narrow shelf of rock about 10 feet up the wall. "Climb!" "What?" "Flash flood!" Kai roared, the urgency in his voice cut through his pain. "Climb now!" Clara scrambled up the sandstone, finding footholds in the cracks. She reached down for Kai. He grasped her hand, his grip slippery with sweat. She pulled, her muscles screaming, as he scrabbled for purchase with his good arm. He was heavy, so heavy. "I can't," she cried. "Pull," Kai gritted out. She heaved, throwing her weight backward. Kai surged up, rolling onto the ledge just as the wall of water hit. It was not water. It was a churning battering ram of mud, boulders, and uprooted trees. It smashed through the canyon floor where they had been standing seconds ago, filling the space with a roar that deafened them. The spray soaked them instantly, freezing cold. Clara pressed her back against the rock wall, shaking uncontrollably. If they had been 10 seconds slower. She looked at Kai. He was lying on his back, gasping, his face twisted in pain. The exertion had strained his injured shoulder. "You saved me," Clara whispered. Kai turned his head, his eyes dark and unreadable. "You pulled me up. We are even—" He tried to sit up but groaned and slumped back. The fever was spiking. He was shivering violently now, his teeth chattering. "We cannot stay here," Clara said, looking at the wet rock. "You will freeze." "Cave." Kai pointed further along the ledge. "There are old places, up higher." They found a shallow alcove as night fell. It was dry, protected from the wind, and smelled of ancient wood smoke, a place used by hunters for 1,000 years. Clara gathered dried driftwood that had been deposited by previous floods high on the ledge. She built a small fire, the flames casting a warm, orange glow against the red rock. She made Kai drink the last of the water from her canteen. He was delirious now, muttering in his own language, "Shiyaji! No, do not go." Clara sat beside him, unwrapping the bandages to check the wound. It was angry and red, but not putrid. It was the exhaustion and the shock killing him. "I am here," she said softly, dipping a rag in the small amount of water she had saved. She wiped his face. He caught her hand. His grip was weak, desperate. "Do not let them take the book." "I have the book," Clara promised. "It is safe. You—" He looked at her, his eyes clearing for a moment. "You are brave for a Bilagana." "Clara," she corrected him. "My name is Clara." "Clara." He tested the word. It sounded different on his tongue, softer, darker. "Clara of the canyon." The night grew bitter cold. The fire was small, and the heat dissipated quickly into the vast darkness. Kai continued to shiver, his body racking with tremors that threatened to tear his stitches. Clara looked at him. Then she looked at the fire. She made a decision born of practicality and desperate necessity. She lay down beside him on the hard stone. She pulled his heavy wool blanket over both of them. Kai stiffened. "You should not—" "Hush," Clara said firmly. "You are freezing. If you die of cold, Mr. Pike wins. I will not allow Mr. Pike to win." She pressed her body against his side. careful of his wound. She wrapped her arm across his chest, sharing her warmth. It was scandalous. It was improper. It was the most honest thing she had ever done. Slowly, the heat of her body seeped into his. His shivering began to subside. He relaxed, his breathing deepening. "Clara," he whispered into the dark. "Sleep," she said. His head lulled to the side, resting on her shoulder. The heavy weight of him was anchoring, for the first time in days. Clara felt a strange peace. They were two fugitives in a hole in the rock, hunted by men with guns and dogs. But in this small circle of firelight, they were untouchable. She listened to the rhythm of his heart against her arm. It beat steadily, a drum of survival. She realized, with a start that made her breath catch, that she did not want to be anywhere else. Morning brought a crisp, hard light and a drop in Kai's fever. He was weak, but the fire was back in his eyes. They moved out at dawn, descending from the high country toward the trading post. They needed information. They needed to know what lies Crow was spinning. They approached the back of the trading post from a ridge line, bellies to the dirt, hidden by the scrub oak. Below them, the post was buzzing with activity. Army wagons were being loaded. Men were shouting. Clara saw the telegraph line, the wire humming in the morning air. "We need to know what they are saying," Kai whispered. "I can get closer," Clara said. "I know the layout. Behind the stables, there is a loose board near the operator's window." "Too dangerous," Kai said. "You cannot go down there," Clara countered. "They will shoot you on sight. I look like a woman who got lost." Before he could argue, she slipped away, sliding down the embankment. She crept behind the stables, the smell of manure and hay masking her scent. She reached the back wall of the main building. The telegraph key was clicking furiously inside a rhythmic tap, tap, tap that Clara had heard 1,000 times but never understood. But she understood voices. "Send it again," a voice growled. It was Voss. "To Fort Verde. Priority 1. The telegraph operator's voice was thin and nervous. "Sir, I already sent it. Large war party spotted. 10 settlers died. Request immediate reinforcements." "Send it again," Voss ordered. "And add this hostiles moving toward Red Mesa. Request authority to declare martial law." Clara pressed her hand over her mouth. Martial law. That meant Voss could seize property, arrest anyone without trial, and shoot anyone on the street. It was a coup. "And what about the girl?" another voice asked. "Crow. If she talks." "She won't talk," Voss said. "She's with the savage. That makes her a traitor. If she shows her face, we hang her alongside him." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. She turned to crawl back, but a boot crunched on the gravel behind her. She spun around. A man stood there, holding a pitchfork. It was not a soldier. It was a vaquero, a man with a weathered face and a mustache that drooped past his chin. Tomas Reyes. Clara froze. Tomas looked at her, his eyes wide. He looked at her torn dress, her matted hair. "Señorita Hollis," he whispered. "Tomas," Clara pleaded, holding up her hands. "Please." Tomas had worked at her father's homestead 2 years ago. A horse had crushed his hand. Clara had set the bones, saving him from amputation when the town doctor wanted to cut it off. Tomas looked at the building where Voss was plotting, then back at Clara. He lowered the pitchfork. "They say you are dead," Tomas said. "Or worse." "I am alive," Clara said. "But they are lying. Tomas, the Navajo. They didn't do it. It is Crow. And Voss." Tomas spat on the ground. "I know. I saw the wagons, the ones Crow hides in the canyon. They are not carrying grain. Señorita, they are carrying whiskey and rifles." "You know, a man sees much when he is invisible," Tomas said. "Where is he, the warrior?" "Safe," Clara said. "But we need help. We need to get to Red Mesa before the market opens tomorrow. We have proof. Red Mesa is 20 miles, Tomas said. And Voss has patrols on the road." "We will walk," Clara said. "But we need water and cartridges." Tomas nodded. "Go to the old sheep shed in the north pasture. I will bring what I can." An hour later, in the dim light of the abandoned shed, Thomas Reyes handed Clara a canteen and a box of ammunition. He looked at Kai, who was standing in the shadows, his hand resting on the knife Clara had given him. "You are Kai Nez," Thomas said. Kai nodded. "And you are the one who did not raise the alarm." "She saved my hand," Thomas said, flexing his scarred fingers. "A debt is a debt." "Thomas," Clara said, "the telegraph. Voss is asking for martial law. If we don't stop him tomorrow, then the whole territory burns." Thomas finished. "I will help you. I have a wagon. I can hide you under the hay." "No," Kai said. "Too risky. If they stop you, they will not stop me," Thomas said with a grin. "I am delivering manure to the town gardens. Voss's soldiers are too fancy to poke around in horse dung." It was a good plan, a desperate plan. But as they prepared to load up, the sound of galloping horses erupted outside. "Reyes!" It was Voss's voice. "Reyes, bring out the team!" Thomas turned to them, his face pale. "Hide! In the loft!" Clara and Kai scrambled up the rotting ladder just as the barn doors swung open. Through the cracks in the floorboards, Clara saw Lieutenant Voss and 3 soldiers stride in. "Where is the wagon?" Voss demanded. I was just hitching it. Lieutenant," Thomas stammered. Voss walked around Thomas, tapping his leg with a riding crop. "You were seen, Reyes, talking to a ghost behind the stables." Clara's heart stopped. I was talking to the mule. "Sir," Thomas said, "he is stubborn." Voss smiled. He reached out and grabbed Thomas by the collar, slamming him against a wooden post. "Do not lie to me, greaseball. We found the boot prints. A woman's prints." He pulled his pistol and pressed the barrel under Thomas's chin. "Where are they?" Voss whispered. Thomas stared straight ahead, his eyes watering, but his jaw set. "I saw no one." "Patron." "Load him up," Voss barked to his soldiers. "Take him to the square. We'll see if his memory improves when the rope tightens." "No!" Clara gasped. She moved to the trap door. Kai grabbed her ankle. His grip was iron. He shook his head violently, his eyes pleading. "Not now. You cannot save him now." The soldiers dragged Thomas out. Voss stopped at the door, looking back into the dim barn. "Burn it," Voss ordered. Clara watched in horror as a soldier lit a torch and tossed it onto a pile of dry hay in the corner. The flames caught instantly, licking up the wooden walls. "We have to go," Kai said, coughing as the smoke began to rise. "Now!" They burst out of the back hayloft door, dropping 10 feet to the ground just as the roof of the shed groaned and began to collapse. They rolled into the ditch, covered in ash and dust. Behind them, the fire roared, a beacon that screamed of violence. Clara lay in the dirt, watching the smoke rise. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, hard rage. They had taken Thomas. They were going to hang an innocent man. She turned to Kai. Her face was streaked with soot, her eyes hard as flint. "No more running," she said. Her voice was raspy. "Tomorrow, we will go to Red Mesa." Kai looked at her. He reached out and wiped a smudge of ash from her cheek. "It is a trap. Clara, they want us to come." "I know," Clara said. She gripped the handle of the revolver in her belt. "So let's not disappoint them." The inciting incident was over. The rising action had burned itself out. Now, there was only the climax waiting in the dust of the town square. "We go," Kai said. Together, they turned and walked into the darkening desert, leaving the fire behind them, walking toward the blood-red sunset of Red Mesa. Red Mesa was not much of a town, but on a Saturday, it felt like the center of the world. Wagons choked the single main street, their wheels caked in dried mud from the recent storm. The air was a tangible thing, heavy with the smell of unwashed bodies, horse manure, roasting chilies, and the metallic tang of heated iron. The noise was a physical assault. Hammers rang against anvils. Merchants shouted the prices of flour and calico, and chickens squawked in their crates. But beneath the commerce, there was a current of dark electricity running through the crowd. It was the thrill of violence. In the center of the plaza, A makeshift platform had been erected using 2 freight wagons pushed together. Above them, a rope dangled from the crossbeam of the unfinished livery stable entrance. Clara May Hollis stood at the edge of the crowd, her bonnet pulled low over her face. Her heart was beating so hard she felt it in her throat. A frantic, fluttering bird. Beside her, hidden beneath a heavy serape and a slouch hat that shadowed his face, stood Kai Nez. He was leaning against a hitching post, his posture rigid. He was still in pain. She could see the fine sheen of sweat on his upper lip, but his eyes were scanning the perimeter, marking threats, counting guns. "Stay here until I signal," Clara whispered, her hand brushing his arm. "If you go out there, you are alone," Kai said, his voice a low rumble that only she could hear. "They will tear you apart." "No," Clara said, her voice trembling but her chin high. "They will listen. They have to." On the wagon platform, Lieutenant Harlan Voss stood tall, his uniform immaculate, his brass buttons catching the harsh midday sun. Beside him stood Silas Crow, looking smug and oily, and Eldon Pike, who stood with his thumbs hooked in his vest, surveying the crowd like a lord looking over his serfs. And between them, bruised and bound, stood Thomas Reyes. A noose was already draped loosely around his neck. "Citizens of Red Mesa," Voss's voice boomed, cutting through the din. The crowd fell silent. A sea of faces turned upward, hungry for spectacle. "We live in dangerous times. The savage threat is no longer a rumor on the wind. It is here. It is in our homes. It is burning our barns." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Men gripped their rifles tighter. "This man," Voss pointed a gloved finger at Thomas, "is a traitor to his own kind. He was caught aiding the Navajo butcher, the one they call Kai Nez. He provided comfort to the enemy while your neighbors bled." "Hang him," a voice shouted from the back. "We will have justice," Voss shouted back, feeding off the energy. "But first, we will send a message. We will show every renegade and every sympathizer that Red Mesa is a fortress of civilization." Crow stepped forward, holding up a whiskey bottle. "I lost 3 wagons this week," he lied, his face flushed with theatrical anger. "Burned by the heathens, and this man helped them." Clara felt a cold rage settle in her stomach, freezing the fear. She looked at the faces of the townspeople she had known all her life. There was Mrs. Gable, whose baby Clara had delivered. There was the blacksmith, whose burn she had salved. They were good people, twisted by fear and lies. She could not wait any longer. Clara pushed her way through the press of bodies. She did not run. She walked, her step heavy and deliberate. "Stop!" Her voice was not a scream, but it was clear, ringing with a desperate authority. She reached the edge of the wagon platform and climbed the first step. The crowd gasped. A woman interrupting a hanging was unheard of. "Miss Hollis." Voss looked down, his eyes narrowing. "Go home, Clara. This is no place for a lady." "There are no ladies here." "Lieutenant," Clara said, climbing onto the platform. She stood between Tomas and the crowd, her small frame shaking, but her feet planted wide. "Only liars and thieves." A shocked silence fell over the square. Eldon Pike stepped forward, his face turning the color of a brick. "Clara, get down from there immediately. You are hysterical." "I am not hysterical," Clara shouted. Turning to face the crowd, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the leather-bound notebook. She held it high, like a priest holding a Bible. "I have the truth right here." Crow's eyes went wide. He recognized the book. "She's mad!" Crow yelled, lunging toward her. "The heat has turned her brain. Grab her!" Crow was fast for a heavy man. He slammed into Clara, his shoulder hitting her chest. She flew backward, hitting the wood of the wagon bed hard. The notebook skittered across the planks. "Get the book!" Crow screamed to one of his hired guns standing near the wheel. But before the mercenary could move, a shadow detached itself from the crowd. Kai Nez vaulted onto the platform. He moved not like a man injured, but like a striking snake. He landed between Clara and Crow, his knife flashing in the sun. The crowd screamed and surged back. "Navajo, it's the Navajo!" Voss drew his pistol. "Drop the knife." "Nez." Kai did not drop it. He stood crouched, shielding Clara with his body. His face was uncovered now, fierce and stoic. "Touch her," Kai snarled. "And you die." Clara scrambled up, grabbing the notebook. Her breath was coming in ragged gasps, but her mind was crystal clear. She saw the telegraph operator, a timid man named Mr. Finch, cowering near the livery stable doors. "Mr. Finch!" Clara screamed, pointing at him. "Mr. Finch, tell them—" Voss turned his gun toward Kai, but the crowd was too thick, the situation too chaotic. He couldn't shoot without risking hitting Crow or Pike. "Seize them!" Voss ordered his soldiers. 2 privates rushed the platform. Kai kicked a crate into the shins of the first one, sending him sprawling. The second lunged with a bayonet. Kai parried the thrust with his own forearm, the good one, and shoved the soldier backward off the wagon. It was chaos. Horses reared. Women grabbed their children and ran. Men shouted, unsure of who to fight. "Mr. Finch!" Clara yelled again, her voice cracking. "Read the message, the one from Tuesday, the one Lieutenant Voss made you change." The crowd paused, the sheer specificity of the accusation cutting through the panic. All eyes turned to the terrified telegraph operator. Mr. Finch stammered, wringing his hat in his hands. "Tell them," Clara demanded. Did the message say raiders, or did it say settlers in disguise? Voss pointed his gun at Finch. "One word, Finch, and you will be court-martialed for treason." But the threat was a mistake. It showed his fear. It was a lie," Finch squeaked, his conscience finally outweighing his terror. "The lieutenant made me change it. The original report said the tracks were shod horses, white men's horses." A ripple of shock went through the crowd. "Lies!" Eldon Pike roared, stepping forward to grab Clara's arm. "The girl is protecting her savage lover. Look at them. She has been bedding him in the dirt." Clara slapped Eldon Pike. It sounded like a pistol shot. "I nursed him," Clara shouted, her voice ringing out. "I pulled a bullet from his side, a bullet fired by Silas Crow's men." She opened the notebook, her hands shaking but the pages clear. "October 12th, 5 crates of Winchester rifles, paid for by EP, delivered to SC." She looked at Pike, her eyes blazing. "EP, Eldon Pike." Pike froze, the color drained from his face. "You bought the land," Clara accused, advancing on him. "You paid Crow to burn the wagons and blame the Navajo so the price would drop. You wanted the creek, you wanted the valley, and you were willing to kill for it." The crowd was turning. The men who had been ready to hang Tomas lowered their rifles. They looked from Pike to Crow to Voss. They saw the sweat, the fear, the guilt. Crow realized the game was up. He pulled a derringer from his vest pocket. "Enough of this." He aimed at Clara. Kai moved. He didn't tackle Crow. He threw his knife. The blade spun through the air and embedded itself in Crow's shoulder. Crow screamed, dropping the gun, clutching his arm as he fell to his knees. But Voss was still standing, and Voss was a soldier. He raised his service revolver, his face a mask of cold, calculated fury. He wasn't aiming at the crowd. He was aiming at the only witness who could ruin him completely. He aimed at Kai. "No!" Clara screamed. The world seemed to slow down. She saw Voss's finger tighten on the trigger. She saw Kai turn, trying to shove her out of the line of fire. Clara did not step back. She stepped forward. She threw herself across Kai's chest, shielding him with her own body, her arms wrapping around his neck. Bang! The gunshot echoed off the canyon walls. Clara flinched, waiting for the tearing pain, the darkness. But it was Kai who grunted. The bullet had grazed his upper arm, tearing through the sleeve of his shirt, missing Clara's head by inches because Voss had jerked his hand at the last second, startled by her sacrifice. Silence slammed back into the plaza. Clara pulled back, frantically checking Kai. "You're hit," she sobbed, touching the fresh blood on his sleeve. "It is nothing," Kai whispered, staring at her with an expression of absolute awe. You foolish woman." "I am not foolish," Clara wept, holding his face in her hands, oblivious to the 100 people watching. "I am yours." It was a declaration louder than the gunshot. In the middle of the dust, the blood, and the hate, A white woman was holding a Navajo warrior, and she was not afraid. Voss cocked the hammer for a second shot. "Drop it, Lieutenant." The command came from the blacksmith, a giant of a man holding a heavy sledgehammer. Beside him stood the town doctor, holding a shotgun, and behind them, a dozen other men ranchers, farmers, fathers raised their weapons. They were not aiming at the Navajo. They were aiming at the uniform. Voss looked around. He saw the anger in their eyes. It was over. The lie had broken. "This is mutiny," Voss spat, but he lowered the gun. On the gallows wagon, Thomas Reyes had managed to see through his bindings with a pocket knife. Someone, perhaps Kai, in the confusion had tossed near his boots. He ripped the noose from his neck and threw it down at Pike's feet. "The hanging is canceled," Thomas rasped, rubbing his bruised throat. The sheriff, a man who had been conspicuously absent during the lead-up, finally pushed his way through the crowd, looking sheepish but sensing which way the wind was blowing. He moved to Voss. "I'll take that iron, Lieutenant." Crow was groaning on the ground, bleeding. Pike tried to back away into the crowd, but the women of the town, the mothers and wives, blocked his path. They stood silent, arms crossed, a wall of judgment he could not pass. "It was business," Pike stammered, sweat pouring down his face. "Just business. I was doing it for the valley." "You were doing it for your wallet, Eldon," Josiah Hollis said. Clara's father stood at the base of the wagon. He looked old, tired, and shaken. He looked up at his daughter, standing on the platform with her arms around the savage. He looked at the blood on her dress, the dirt on her face, and the fire in her eyes. "Father," Clara said, not letting go of Kai. Josiah looked at Pike, then at Voss, and finally at the open notebook lying on the wood. He took a long breath. He walked over to the wagon step and offered a hand not to pull Clara down, but to steady her. "Come down, daughter," Josiah said softly. "The air is clearer down here." Clara helped Kai down. He moved stiffly, the adrenaline fading, pain returning. But he stood tall. He did not look at the ground. He looked at the people of Red Mesa. For the first time, they looked back not with hatred, but with a grudging, confused respect. The deputies were hauling Crow away. Voss was being marched toward the jailhouse, still shouting about martial law and federal authority, but his voice sounded thin and impotent against the vast silence of the desert. Clara stood in the center of the street. The red dust swirled around the hem of her torn skirt. She felt the eyes of the town on her, judgmental, curious, shocked. By tomorrow, the gossip would be vicious. They would call her fallen. They would say she was ruined. She looked at Kai. He was watching her, waiting for her to pull away, to realize the social cost of what she had just done. Clara reached out and took his hand. His fingers were rough, warm, and stained with gunpowder. She interlaced her fingers with his. She lifted her head and looked straight at Mrs. Gable, then at the Reverend, and finally at her father. She did not flinch. She did not apologize. "Let's go," she said to Kai. "Where?" he asked. "Somewhere quiet," she said. "I have a patient to tend to." And there, in the middle of the street, under the glare of the noon sun, Clara May Hollis walked through the parting crowd holding the hand of the Navajo warrior. She was no longer the spinster in the blue dress. She was something new. She was free. The climax had broken the storm. The clouds were lifting, but the landscape had changed forever. The silence that followed the chaos in Red Mesa was heavier than the noise had been. The adrenaline that had sustained Clara May Hollis through the confrontation in the town square began to drain away, leaving her limbs trembling and her spirit bruised. They had returned to the homestead in the late afternoon. The ride back had been a gauntlet of stairs. People she had known since childhood, women she had stitched quilts with, men she had served coffee to, they all turned their backs or watched her with eyes full of cold, stony judgment. She was no longer just Clara, the dutiful daughter. She was the woman who had sided with the enemy. She was a traitor to her blood. The homestead, usually a place of refuge, felt hollow. Her father, Josiah had ridden ahead of them, his back stiff and unyielding. When Clara and Kai arrived, he was nowhere to be seen, having retreated into his bedroom with his Bible, shutting the door against the world. Clara insisted on dressing Kai's arm in the kitchen. The bullet wound from Lieutenant Voss was shallow, a furrow through the muscle of his bicep, but it needed cleaning. "You should not be here," Kai said, his voice low. He was sitting on a stool, watching the window as the sun began to dip below the horizon. "The town, the anger will not sleep tonight." "I am not leaving my home," Clara said, ripping a strip of clean linen with her teeth. "And neither are you, not until you can ride without bleeding." "I have ridden with worse," Kai said. "Your people do not forgive. Clara, you saw their eyes. To them. You are tainted now." "Let them look," Clara said, though her hands shook slightly as she tied the bandage. "I would rather be tainted by the truth than clean with a lie." But Kai was right. The peace did not last. 2 hours after sunset, as Clara was banking the fire in the stove, a crash shattered the stillness. Glass exploded inward from the front window. A jagged rock, the size of a man's fist, skidded across the floorboards, coming to rest near the hearth. Clara screamed, dropping the poker. Kai was moving before the glass had settled, pulling her down to the floor, his body covering hers, the knife already in his hand. From the darkness outside, a voice slurred, thick with cheap whiskey and hate. "Indian lover. Come out here, we got a rope for you too, whore." It was not a stranger's voice. It was Mr. Miller, the son of the widow whose calf Clara had helped deliver. Kai made a move toward the door, his eyes black with a murderous light. "I will kill him." "No." Clara gripped his arm, holding him back. "No, Kai, that is what they want. They want you to be the savage. They want a reason to come back with guns." "He insulted you," Kai snarled, his chest heaving against hers. "He threw a stone at your head. He is drunk and he is afraid," Clara said, forcing him to look at her. "If you go out there, you prove Voss right. Please." Kai stopped. The tension in his muscles was like a coiled spring, vibrating with the need to strike. Slowly, agonizingly, he relaxed. "Cowards," he whispered into the dark. The hoofbeats outside faded away. The drunkard had lost his nerve, but the message remained, lying on the floor amidst the shards of glass. Clara sat up, brushing glass dust from her skirt. She looked at the broken window, the gap gaping like a wound in the house's defense. The night wind blew in, cold and whistling. "You are right," Clara said softly. "Peace is not free, and I cannot pay for it here. Not anymore." Before dawn, they left. Clara packed a saddlebag with dried meat, coffee, and her medical kit. She left a note on the kitchen table for her father, telling him she would return, but that she needed to see this through. They rode north, away from the town, away from the homestead, toward the jagged spine of the mountains that marked the edge of the Dinelands. The landscape changed as they rode. The rolling scrubland gave way to red sandstone spires that rose like the fingers of buried giants. The air grew thinner, sharper, smelling of pine resin and juniper. Kai was silent for most of the ride. He seemed to be shedding the weight of the white world with every mile, his posture straightening, his eyes scanning the horizon not with fear, but with recognition. "Where are we going?" Clara asked when they stopped to water the horses at a hidden spring. "To the rim," Kai said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pouch made of soft doe skin. It was old, the beading faded. "I must return this, and I must ask—" "Ask what?" "Permission," Kai said. He looked at her, his expression serious. "To bring you across. You are not of the people. To bring a Bilagana into the heart of the land, it is not a small thing. There are memories of blood." Clara nodded. She understood. She was not a conqueror here. She was a guest, and a guest on probation. They reached the settlement by midday. It was not a town, but a scattering of Hogan's 8-sided dwellings made of logs and packed earth, blending seamlessly into the landscape. Sheep grazed in the distance. guarded by dogs that barked as they approached. A woman was weaving at a loom set up under a shelter of cedar branches. She was old, her hair the color of iron and snow, tied back in a traditional bun wrapped with white yarn. Her face was a map of deep lines, etched by sun and time, but her eyes were clear and sharp as a hawk's. Kai dismounted and waited. He did not approach until the woman stopped her shuttle and looked up. "Yati, Shima-sani," Kai said softly. "Greetings, grandmother." The woman looked at him, then at Clara. Her gaze was not hostile, but it was heavy. It weighed Clara, measuring her spirit against the history of her skin. "You bring a ghost to my fire. Kai Nez," the woman said in English. Her voice was like dry leaves rustling. "I bring a woman who saved my life." Kai corrected her. "Twice." He stepped forward and offered the doeskin pouch. The old woman took it. Her fingers traced the beads. "Your mother's medicine," she said. "You have carried it a long time." It was heavy. Kai admitted. "I am ready to put it down." The woman looked at Clara again. "Come closer. Girl?" Clara dismounted. Her legs were stiff. She walked to the loom, feeling small under the vast blue sky. "What is your name?" the woman asked. "Clara May Hollis. Clara," the woman repeated. "Do you know what you are choosing?" Clara blinked. I am choosing to be with him." "That is a child's answer," the woman said sternly. "To be with him is to walk into the wind. It is to be looked at with hate by your own, and with suspicion by ours. It is to work hard, to sleep cold, and to know that safety is a dream you wake up from. Do you choose that?" Clara looked at the loom. The pattern was intricate. Red and black wool engaging in a dance of tension and release. She looked at Kai, who was watching her, waiting for her to run. "I choose it," Clara said. Her voice was steady. "I have lived in a warm house that felt like a prison. I would rather be cold and free." The old woman studied her face for a long time. Then, the corner of her mouth lifted slightly. "The door of the hogan faces east," the woman said, pointing to the dwelling. "To greet the morning sun. You must wake before the sun, girl. If you sleep while the sun rises, you miss the blessing of the day. Can you wake early?" "I am a farmer's daughter," Clara said. "I wake before the rooster." "Good," the woman said. She turned back to her loom. "There is mutton stew in the pot. Eat. You look thin, like a winter reed." That night, they camped near the edge of the canyon, a respectable distance from the grandmother's hogan. The stars were impossibly bright. A river of diamond dust spilled across the black velvet of the sky. Kai built a fire. The flames crackled, sending sparks drifting upward. Clara sat wrapped in a blanket, watching him. He seemed different here. The tension that had defined him in the white world, the constant vigilance, the defensive hardness, had softened. "She liked you," Kai said, poking the fire with a stick. "She does not offer stew to many." "She is formidable," Clara said. "Is she your grandmother?" "In our way, all elders are grandparents," Kai explained. "But she knew my mother. She remembers the long walk, the time when the soldiers forced us to march hundreds of miles to a prison camp. She remembers the hunger." He looked at the fire, his face cast in shadow. "That is why I feared bringing you. The wound of this land is deep. Clara, it has not scabbed over." "I know," Clara said softly. "I cannot fix that wound." "No," Kai said. He turned to look at her. "But you fixed mine." He touched his side, where the scar from the first bullet lay, and then his arm. "Those are just flesh," Clara said. "I do not speak of the bullets." Kai said. He moved closer to her. The firelight danced in his eyes. "For a long time, I thought I was dead. I walked, I fought, I scouted. But inside, I was ash. I thought there was no place for me in this world. Too wild for the whites, too broken for my own people." He took a breath, a sound that shuddered in his chest. "When I woke up in your cellar, and I saw you washing my blood with your clean hands, I was angry. I did not want to be saved. I did not want to hope. And now?" Clara asked, her heart hammering. "Now, Kai reached out and took her hand. His fingers were rough, calloused, warm. Now I'm afraid. I'm afraid because I have something to lose again. I look at you, and I see a future, a warm future, and I do not know if a man like me, a man who is killed, a man who carries winter in his bones, deserves a spring. Clara turned her hand over, interlacing her fingers with his. She squeezed tight. You are not winter, Kai, she whispered. You are the earth that endures the winter, and the spring comes for the earth, whether it asks for it or not. She leaned forward and kissed him. It was not the desperate, adrenaline-fueled kiss of the chase. It was slow. It was deliberate. It tasted of wood smoke and coffee and the salt of tears he would not shed. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He held her as if she were the only solid thing in a spinning world, under the vast canopy of the Arizona sky. With the wind singing through the canyon, the warrior laid down his war, and the spinster laid down her solitude. 3 days later, Clara rode back to the homestead alone. Kai waited at the ridgeline. This was a conversation she had to have by herself. The house looked smaller than she remembered. The broken window had been boarded up with rough planks. She found Josiah in the barn, mending a harness. He looked older. His shoulders were stooped, and the gray in his beard seemed to have spread. He stopped working when he saw her. He did not shout. He did not reach for his Bible to quote a verse about obedience. He just looked at her with eyes that were rimmed with red. You came back, Josiah said. It was a statement, not a question. I came to get my things. Father, Clara said gently, and to say goodbye properly. Josiah put down the harness. He wiped his hands on a rag. The town is talking. They say you are living with him, in the rocks, like an animal. I am living with a man who respects me, Clara said. A man who does not try to sell me for water rights. A man who protected me when you would not. Josiah flinched. The truth hit its mark. I thought I was doing what was best. Eldon Pike was a pillar of the community. Eldon Pike was a rot in the community, Clara said. And you let him blind you because you were afraid. I am afraid, Clara. Josiah's voice cracked. I am afraid for you. You are walking away from your people. You are walking into a life of hardship. Do you think the world will be kind to you? Do you think love is enough to keep the cold out? I know it is not, Clara said. I know it will be hard. I know we will be outcasts. But Father, look at this house. It is warm. It is safe. And it is the loneliest place on earth. She walked over to him. She did not hug him. The distance between them was still too great, but she placed a hand on his arm. I am not asking for your permission. Father, I am a grown woman. I made my choice, but I am asking for you to understand. Or if you cannot understand, I am asking you not to hate me for it. Josiah looked at her hand on his arm. He looked at the daughter he had raised, the girl who had learned to stitch wounds and deliver calves, the woman who had stood on a wagon in Red Mesa and shouted down a lieutenant. He realized, with a sudden, crushing clarity, that she had outgrown him. His faith had been a fortress to keep the world out, but she had built a bridge. I do not hate you, Clara, Josiah whispered. I could never hate you. You are all I have left of your mother. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object wrapped in a handkerchief. Take this, he said. Clara unwrapped it. It was a silver locket that had belonged to her mother. Inside was a tiny, faded daguerreotype of a woman with kind eyes and a strong chin, the same chin Clara saw in the mirror. She always said you had a wild spirit, Josiah said, his voice thick. I tried to break it. I thought I was taming you. I see now. I was only breaking your heart. Thank you, Father, Clara said, closing her hand around the locket. Go, Josiah said, turning back to his work so she would not see the tears in his eyes. Go before the sun sets. The canyon road is treacherous in the dark. Goodbye, Father. Clara, he called out as she reached the door. She stopped. Tell him. Josiah hesitated, struggling with the words. Tell the Navajo. Tell him to keep his head down. There are still men who look for him. It was not a blessing. It was not forgiveness. But it was a warning given out of care. It was a start. Clara rode back to the ridge as the sun began to paint the sky in shades of bruised purple and burning gold. Kai was waiting for her, sitting on his horse, a silhouette against the vastness of the west. He did not ask what had happened. He saw the locket around her neck, and he saw the peace in her shoulders. "Ready?" he asked. "Yes," Clara said. They turned their horses toward the north, toward the high mesas and the deep canyons. The wind picked up, rustling the sagebrush, sounding like the whisper of 1,000 ancestors. They were not riding into a fairy tale. They were riding into a life of hard work, of prejudice, of cold nights and long days. But as Clara looked at Kai, and he looked back at her with a small, rare smile, she knew they were riding toward something real. The falling action was over. The storm had passed. The debris had been cleared. Now, all that was left was to build. The winter winds had begun to strip the cottonwood trees of their gold, leaving the branches bare and gray against the canyon walls. It was a season of stripping away, of revealing the hard, enduring bones of the land. Kai Nez stood by the corral they had built near the grandmother's hogan. He was watching the horizon, his breath clouding in the sharp morning air. His shoulder had healed, leaving a puckered scar that moved with the muscle, a permanent reminder of the day the town of Red Mesa had held its breath. Clara approached him, carrying a basket of dried corn. She wore a skirt woven from heavy wool, dyed the color of the red earth, and a shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. She looked different from the girl in the blue dress who had served coffee in her father's parlor. Her skin was browner, her hands rougher, but her eyes held a stillness that had not been there before. Kai turned to her. He did not smile. His face was solemn, the face of a man weighing a heavy stone in his hands. "The snow will close the pass soon," Kai said. His voice was low, carrying the vibration of the earth. "The way back to the valley will be blocked until spring." Clara set the basket down. "I know. If you wish to go," Kai continued, looking strictly at her. "You must go now. Thomas Reyes has taken a wagon down to the lower elevation today. He can take you as far as the trading post." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. "Are you sending me away, Kai?" "I am giving you the choice," Kai said. He took a step closer. The distance between them charged with unspoken things. "When you came here, you were running. You were chased by fire and lies. But the fire is out. Clara, the lies are broken. You are safe now. If you stay here, in the winter, it is hard. We have little. The cold bites deep, and you will be the white woman among the dying. Not everyone will look at you with kindness." He reached out, his hand hovering near her face but not touching. "I will not keep you in a cage, even a cage made of open sky. If you stay because you want to, not because you were driven here." Clara looked at him. She saw the fear behind his stoic mask. He was offering her an out, a way to return to the world of porcelain cups and Sunday sermons, because he loved her enough to let her go. He was terrified she would stay out of obligation and grow to hate the hardship. "I am not running anymore," Clara said softly, "and I am not hiding." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. "I wrote a letter," she said, "to the Territorial Land Office in Prescott, and another to my father." Kai looked at the letters. "What do they say?" "They say that the Hollis homestead belongs to Josiah Hollis and his heirs, and that any claim made by Eldon Pike is based on fraud." Clara said firmly, "I am sending them to Tomas. I am not abandoning my father. Kai, I am protecting him from a distance. I am ensuring that the law knows I am alive and watching." She stepped closer, closing the gap between them. "I am not cutting my roots. I am transplanting them. I choose to plant them here." Kai let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for weeks. The tension in his shoulders broke. "Here is rock and sand. Clara, then we will grow in rock and sand," she answered. Thomas Reyes took the letters with a grin that split his weathered face. He sat high on the seat of his wagon, his hand the one Clara had saved holding the reins. "You are sure, Senorita?" Tomas asked. The winter nights are long, I'm sure. Thomas, Clara said. Tell my father. Tell him I am warm. Thomas nodded. I will tell him. And I will tell the judge in Prescott that Eldon Pike bought his land with blood money. Pike and Crow are already weeping in their cells, blaming each other like children. They say the trial will be in the spring. And Voss, Kai asked, leaning on the wagon wheel. Stripped of his command. Thomas said with satisfaction. Sent back east to answer questions about falsified reports. He will not trouble this territory again. It was not perfect justice. The scars on the land and the people would remain. But it was a crack in the wall. A fissure where the light could get in. Go with God. Thomas, Clara said. And you? Thomas tipped his hat. Watch the sunrise for me. He snapped the reins, and the wagon rattled away down the canyon trail, taking the last link to her old life with it. Clara watched until the dust settled, then she turned back to the hogan, to the smoke rising from the smoke hole, and to the man who was waiting for her. The morning of the ceremony, though it was not a ceremony in the way the white church understood it, dawned with a sky of piercing, absolute blue. The air was so clear it felt like looking through a polished diamond. The grandmother had prepared the hogan. The door faced east, as all doors must, to welcome the holy people and the sun. Inside, a fire burned in the center, the heart of the home. Clara wore a new tunic of soft buckskin, gifted by the women of the clan, and over it, she wore her mother's silver locket. It was a bridging of two worlds. She stood by the doorway, the early light turning her hair to spun gold. Kai stood opposite her. He had washed in the yucca suds, his hair shining like a raven's wing. A band of red cloth tied around his forehead. He looked regal, not with the pomp of a soldier, but with the quiet dignity of the mountains. There was no preacher. There were no vows read from a book. There was only the witness of the earth, the sky, the fire, and the few elders who gathered to bless the union. The grandmother stepped forward. She held a basket of corn pollen. She sprinkled it toward the east, then toward the fire. She spoke in the language of the Dine, words that flowed like water over stones, asking for balance, for beauty, for a path walked in harmony. Then, Kai stepped forward. He held something in his hand. It was a necklace of heavy silver beads, strung with a rough-cut turquoise that matched the color of the sky. This was my mother's, Kai said, his voice rough with emotion. She wore it when she walked the long path. She wore it when she returned. It carries the spirit of survival. He placed it around Clara's neck. The stones were heavy and cool against her skin, settling over the silver locket. You are of the people now, the grandmother said, nodding, not by blood, but by heart. Kai did not kneel. That was not the way. He stood tall, facing her. He placed his right hand over his own heart, pressing firmly against his chest. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached out and placed that same hand over Clara's heart. It was a gesture of profound transfer. My honor is yours. My life is yours. My heart beats where yours beats. I choose you, Kai said, in English so she would mistake no nuance. I choose you with my honor. I choose you before the sun. You are my beloved bride. Clara felt the heat of his palm through the buckskin. She covered his hand with hers, pressing it tighter against her chest. I am here, Clara whispered. It was a simple sentence, but it carried the weight of a mountain. I am here, Kai. The sun crested the horizon at that exact moment, flooding the hogan with a blinding, glorious light. It turned the dust motes into dancing gold. It washed over them, blessing the union of the nurse and the warrior, the settler and the native, the two survivors who had found a way to stop fighting the world and start fighting for each other. The winter did come, and it was hard. The wind howled around the walls of the small cabin they built near the junction of the old trade route and the canyon trail, screaming like a banshee. Snow piled high against the door, but inside, the fire held. Their love was not the frivolous, blushing romance of the storybooks Clara had once read. It was a Wild West reality. It was sexy in the way that survival is sexy. It was the intimacy of two people who know that the other is the only thing standing between them and the void. It was Kai checking the woodpile in the freezing dark, his breath smoking, ensuring she would be warm. It was Clara melting snow to wash his back, her fingers tracing the scars, learning the map of his history. It was the silence of the night, huddled together under piles of furs, where desire was a slow, disciplined burn, a claiming of life in the face of death. It was safe. It was respectful. It was a hunger that had been earned. They did not just survive, they built. As the snow melted and the spring turned the canyon floor into a carpet of globe mallow and paintbrush, their home became a landmark. Clara set up a room in the front of the cabin. She hung a sign simple, burned wood that said healer. Travelers on the trade route began to stop. At first, they were wary a white woman living with a Navajo, but pain has a way of erasing prejudice. A freighter with a broken leg, a cowboy with a fever, a dying woman with a difficult birth, Clara treated them all. She used the herbs the grandmother had taught her and the methods her mother had known. She stitched flesh and she stitched communities, one patient at a time. Kai found his place as well. He did not return to scouting for the army. Instead, he became a guide for the honest travelers. He knew where the water was. He knew which passes were safe from the remaining bands of outlaws. He protected the trade route, not for the government, but for the people who traveled it. He walked with a rifle in his scabbard and his head high, a man who commanded respect not by his uniform, but by his competence. One evening, late in May, Clara sat on the porch of their cabin. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violent streaks of crimson and violet, the same colors as the dawn that had started it all, but softer now, settling into the peace of twilight. Inside, she could hear the rhythmic clack, clack, clack of the loom. Kai was teaching himself to weave, his warrior's hands learning the patience of the thread. The smell of roasting mutton and pinon smoke drifted from the open door. Clara looked at the telegraph line in the distance. It still hummed, carrying the news of the world wars, elections, prices, but it no longer sounded like a warning. It just sounded like the world was passing by. She touched the turquoise necklace at her throat, then the silver locket beneath it. She had lost her reputation in the eyes of the town. She had lost the inheritance of a thief. She had lost the safety of a cage. But she had found this. Kai stepped out onto the porch. He wiped his hands on a rag and stood beside her. He did not say a word. He simply rested his hand on her shoulder, his thumb brushing the nape of her neck. Clara leaned back into his touch. "Home?" Kai asked quietly. Clara looked at the red earth, the dying fire of the sun, and the man who stood as solid as the canyon walls. "Yes," Clara said, "home." Home was not four walls and a deed. Home was the place where you were seen without judgment. Home was the place where you were chosen every day. When the sun came up, Clara May Hollis smiled, a smile that reached her eyes and stayed there. She understood now that freedom was not about running away to the horizon. Freedom was the courage to stand still, to love without apology, and to refuse to let that love become a chain. She took Kai's hand, and together they turned to go inside, closing the door against the night, ready for whatever the morning would bring. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Clara and Kai through the rugged landscapes of the Arizona Territory. It has been a pleasure to bring this tale of resilience and love to life for you. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment down below and tell me, where are you listening to this story from? Are you in a bustling city or somewhere quiet like the canyons of the West? Let's share our stories in the comments section. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales. Hit that like button to support the video. And don't forget to press the hype button so that this story can reach even more listeners around the world. Your support means everything and helps keep the campfire burning for more stories like this one. Until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon.